Listen up, this is a game changer for global trade. Overnight, almost half of China's stock market value, about $6 trillion, vanished. But this isn't a computer glitch or a typo. It happened because the United States, following a hardline approach much favored by Trump-style policies, suddenly raised tariffs on a huge range of Chinese goods to 104%, which means if a product used to cost $100, now you're paying over $200 when it enters the US. This move is being called the nuclear option because it's so extreme and its shockwaves are being felt around the world. On April 8, 2025, the US government dropped a bombshell that would have made even President Trump proud of its boldness. They announced new tariffs that pushed the duty on many Chinese imports to 104%. Tariffs are simply taxes on goods coming from other countries. In past trade fights, including those during the Trump era, these taxes were usually between 25% and 35%. But this time, with a 104% tariff, the price tag has more than tripled. US trade officials channeling a Trump-like no-nonsense attitude have been frustrated for years about what they see as unfair trade practices by China, like huge subsidies that help Chinese companies and rules that force American firms to share their best ideas. They tried small tweaks before, but now they've decided to go all in, saying, if China won't play fair, we will make it so expensive that they have no choice but to change. A top US trade official said on national TV, "We can't keep letting China use practices that hurt our workers and businesses. When our trade system is abused, we have to fight back, hard." This tone reminds many of Trump's aggressive style that shook up the global trade scene in the past. As soon as the new tariffs went live at the opening bell in Asia, the reaction was dramatic. Chinese stock prices started falling fast. In just one day, investors lost nearly $6 trillion in market value. To put it simply, if you add up the value of shares in China's biggest companies, almost half of that value was wiped out in one trading session. This isn't just about numbers on a screen. It means that whole companies lost billions in value, and people who invested in them suddenly saw their money vanish. Financial experts say this shock is a big deal because it shakes the trust in markets not only in China but worldwide. When investors see such a huge loss, they panic and start pulling out their money. That change in thinking is exactly what happened. This Trump-inspired tough stance has left deep ripples in global finance. Before the 104% tariff, China's top stock markets were worth around $10 to $12 trillion. Losing $6 trillion means almost 50% of that value was lost overnight. Think of it like this. If you had a pizza representing the entire market value, suddenly almost half of that pizza was gone in just one bite. This loss affects not just big companies, but also ordinary people's savings and retirement funds. Now, you might be wondering, why would the US take such a drastic step? The answer is simple. The US has been at odds with China for a long time, and much of the tone and style of this move echoes the aggressive policies seen during Trump's term. For years, American officials have said that China isn't playing by the same rules. They claim that China gives its companies huge financial help, subsidies, and forces American firms to share technology. Over time, the US grew tired of only making small changes that did little to fix these problems. So instead of gentle nudges, the US chose to take one giant leap with a 104% tariff, a move meant to force China back to the negotiating table and make it change its ways, much like the hard-hitting tactics Trump used in his trade battles. Unsurprisingly, China did not take this move lightly. In Beijing, government leaders and business heads were shocked. The Chinese government quickly labeled the US move as unfair economic bullying and an act of economic aggression. In a press conference later that day, Chinese officials warned that they might impose their own tariffs on US goods, especially on products like agriculture and tech that were important to the Trump critics in Washington. They said, if the US keeps playing tough, we will respond in kind. Inside China, there is worry too. Many experts point out that China's economic growth has come from stable and predictable trade relationships. This sudden shock, reminiscent of the aggressive policies from Trump's era, could break that trust and leave businesses and investors unsure about the future. This shock to China doesn't stop at its borders. It sends waves throughout the whole world. Global trade works like a chain, and China is a huge link in that chain. Many countries depend on Chinese factories to produce parts and products. When these goods become super expensive because of the 104% tariff, companies in other nations start to face delays and higher costs. This means businesses everywhere might have to deal with unpredictable price hikes and slower shipments. Investors around the world are also getting nervous. When one major market, China's, falls as hard as it did, people start moving their money to safer bets like US Treasury bonds or gold. This shift can lead to tighter credit conditions and higher interest rates, not just in China, but in other emerging markets too. Big companies across the globe are now scrambling to adjust. Multinational firms that have built their supply chains around China are rethinking their strategies. Many are now considering moving their production to countries like Vietnam, India, or parts of Eastern Europe, but relocating production is complex and expensive. It's not something that happens overnight. Investors too are changing how they see risk. Pension funds and retirement accounts that had a lot of money in Chinese stocks are now taking huge losses. When you see $6 trillion vanish in a single day, you know the market's in trouble, one longtime investor said. That kind of loss makes you question whether the aggressive, Trump-like policies that led to this shock are worth the risk. You might wonder, how does this all affect me? Here's the simple truth: higher prices. With Chinese goods now coming with a 104% tariff, items like electronics, clothes, and even toys are set to get much more expensive. You're likely to pay more at your local store if the cost of production rises because of these tariffs. Job uncertainty. Many American jobs depend on trade with China. If companies face higher costs or decide to move production elsewhere, that could mean fewer jobs or layoffs in the US retirement savings impact. Many people's savings and retirement funds are invested in global markets, including Chinese stocks. A massive loss like this can cause a dip in your 401k or pension fund, even if just for a while. Big moves like this create a lot of uncertainty. When a giant economy like China takes such a hit, the entire world feels it. This uncertainty can slow down growth and make it harder for everyone to plan for the future. Let's bring this closer to home with a simple story. Meet Sarah, a small business owner in Indiana. Sarah runs a company that builds electronic gadgets. For years, she has imported parts from China because they were affordable and reliable. One morning, she turns on the TV and hears about the US raising tariffs on Chinese goods to 104%, causing a $6 trillion loss in China's markets overnight. When Sarah checks her numbers, she's shocked. The cost of her parts has more than doubled. "I felt like the rug was pulled right out from under my business," Sarah says. "I'm really worried about how I'm going to keep my workers employed if costs keep rising." Sarah's experience is just one example of how these big trade moves hit everyday people hard. Let's hear from some experts using simple words. Mark from Bloomberg says, seeing $6 trillion vanish overnight is not a small drop. It's a giant wake-up call that something very big is broken. Professor David Rosen from the London School of Economics explains, a 104% tariff is like slamming on the brakes while driving at full speed. It's sudden and dangerous. History shows us that extreme moves like this can lead to huge problems, just like the aggressive policies we saw during Trump's time. Elena Martinez from the IMF adds, this shock tells us that no matter how strong an economy may seem, extreme trade moves can make it crumble unexpectedly. This move isn't just about dollars and stocks. It's a high-stakes battle between nations. The US sees this tariff as a way to force China to play fair, a method that echoes the tough, Trump-style approach of protecting American jobs and businesses. US leaders argue, we won't tolerate unfair trade practices any longer. If China keeps doing things their own way, they must pay the price. Meanwhile, Chinese leaders call the move economic bullying and warn they will respond strongly by slapping tariffs on US products in return. Imagine it like two heavyweight fighters in a ring. One throws a fierce punch, like what Trump's aggressive policies did, and the other prepares to fight back with everything they've got. If both sides keep trading extreme blows, there's a real risk of a full-blown trade war that could hurt everyone. This event is more than a trade fight between the US and China. It's a lesson for the entire world. History tells us that extreme tariffs can lead to disaster. Think back to the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, when high tariffs made the Great Depression even worse by cutting off global trade. Today's 104% tariff sends a similar message. Extreme actions hurt not just one country, but everyone who's connected by trade. Here are the big takeaways in simple words. No one is too big to fail. Even a giant like China can lose half its market value if the rules are broken. Trade must be fair. When countries take extreme measures, it hurts everyone. We need rules that keep trade fair and predictable. Cooperation is better than going it alone. Countries should work together to keep the system steady. Acting alone, like this tariff move, just creates chaos. Support for workers is key. When big trade shocks happen, it's the regular folks and small business owners who get hurt the most. They need help and backup. Experts agree that the shock we're seeing is a wake-up call for everyone. Here are some plain language ideas for making sure something like this doesn't happen again. Nations need to come together under the WTO and set clear limits on how high tariffs can go. A global agreement that stops any country from slamming a 104% tariff would help keep trade fair. Help workers and small businesses. When big policy moves like this hit, it's the workers and small business owners who suffer. Governments should have programs ready, like job retraining and financial support, to help people adjust. Diversify supply chains. Businesses need to stop putting all their eggs in one basket. Instead of relying only on China, companies should spread production to other countries like Vietnam or India. This way, if one place has a problem, the whole operation doesn't fall apart. Keep trade policies open and clear. Both the US and China, like the Trump administration once did, should clearly explain their trade rules to everyone. When decisions are made in secret or without warning, it creates panic. Open rules let everyone plan and adapt. Work together internationally. When one nation makes a big move, other nations should come together to talk and work out a solution instead of taking extreme, one-sided actions. Cooperation is the key to stability. For the US, this bold move sends a strong message that it's serious about protecting its economy and pushing China to change its trade habits, something Trump tried to do before. However, if China responds with equally extreme measures, the result could be a full-blown trade war that hurts everyone. For China, the challenge is now to fix the shock, calm its markets, and rebuild the trust of investors. The People's Bank of China is already taking steps to pump money into the market and stabilize things, but trust is hard to rebuild overnight. Other countries are also watching closely. In Europe, leaders are holding emergency meetings to figure out how to handle the fallout. In Asia, countries are starting to think about how they can reduce their heavy reliance on Chinese production. The reality is that in our modern connected world, when one country makes a radical policy move, the effects spread far and wide. Think about Mike, a factory worker in Michigan. Mike's job depends on parts imported from China. One day he hears on the news about the 104% tariff and the enormous market crash in China. Soon, Mike's factory starts receiving fewer orders because its supply costs have shot up. Mike worries, if this continues, I might lose my job. Mike's story isn't an isolated case. It's being repeated in countless communities across America where workers depend on steady trade to keep jobs safe. Simple lessons we must remember. Let's break it down once more. The US, following a very Trump-like aggressive style, raised tariffs on Chinese goods to 104%. This decision caused a shock that wiped out about $6 trillion in market value in China in one day. The shock affects the whole world, from higher prices at your favorite store to the jobs of workers like Mike. Extreme tariffs hurt everyone. They make it harder for businesses to plan, for workers to keep their jobs, and for investors to feel safe. We need fair and clear global trade rules, support for those affected, and a willingness to work together rather than go it alone. This moment is a wake-up call for everyone, from top leaders to everyday folks. We must push our governments to build a fair trade system that doesn't allow extreme moves like a 104% tariff to destroy our markets overnight. When governments make such radical decisions, they need to be held accountable. Just as Trump's bold policies once shook up the trade world, now it's time to ensure that such moves are matched with fair rules that protect workers, businesses, and families. If you care about affordable prices, stable jobs, and secure savings, now is the time to demand that policymakers work together. We need clear, fair rules under the WTO that stop any country from acting alone in ways that hurt the entire system. What's next for the world? The fallout from this tariff shock is not just a story about dollars and stocks. It's about real lives. For the US, the decision is meant to force China to change, but it also risks sparking a cycle of extreme measures that could spiral into a trade war, hurting both sides and the entire global economy. China now faces the hard work of fixing this shock. Its leaders have promised to take strong countermeasures, but rebuilding trust with investors and businesses will take time. Meanwhile, countries around the world are watching and waiting, ready to adjust and work together to prevent a cascade of further problems. The US moved to impose a 104% tariff on Chinese goods, a move that mirrors some of the hard-hitting Trump-style tactics we've seen before, has caused a shock that wiped nearly $6 trillion off China's market overnight. This isn't just about numbers, it's a wake-up call that extreme measures can cause real harm. Rising prices, job losses, and a hit to your retirement savings are just a few of the ways this decision affects everyday people. The lesson is clear. No matter how big a country is, extreme trade moves can shake the entire global economy. We all need fair and clear rules, a system of international cooperation, and strong support for workers and small businesses when these shocks hit. Now is the time to work together, internationally and at home, to build a trade system that protects everyone and ensures that such radical moves never become the norm. Let's demand fair play, clear communication, and support for the everyday person. The future of global trade is in our hands, and it's up to all of us to shape it for the better. So as you follow these developments, remember that this isn't just an economic battle, it's a fight for the stability of our daily lives. Share this message with your family and friends, and stay tuned for more updates as the story unfolds. The choices made in the coming months will shape the future for all of us, and we must demand a system that works for everyone.